Welcome back, students. Today we're starting something that is my personal favorite to teach, and that is narrative writing. Narrative writing is one of the four components of composition writing. Today I'm going to introduce to you the basics of narrative writing, and I'm going to give you a few tips here and there that will make your stories better than all the others that have been submitted by the students. The first thing that we need to get out of the way is the types of narrative that exist. What a lot of people don't know, and what they are often not informed by their schools as well, that there is a lot of room for experimentation in storytelling, which is another word for narrative writing. Students are often told to play it safe, which is why they always stick to the same boring old pattern of telling a story. Something happens in the start, something happens in the middle, and then the story comes to a close. While there's nothing wrong with doing all of those things, there is always so much room for creativity in narrative that you can show that you're a good writer within the story. The first thing that I want you to know is there are three types of narratives that exist: first person, second person, and third person. You might be familiar with the first and the third person. Second person narrative is the one that is used the least. First person narrative is where you place yourself within the story. The pronoun I is the most prominent. You are the narrator, you are telling the story, and you are one of the characters. This narrative is extremely fun to experiment with, and it's also very unreliable. Maybe you're lying. Maybe we don't know what actually happened and we just have your word to go for it. So there's a lot of room for creativity. You can be a character interacting with others, or you can just be telling a story based on something you experienced personally. So the first person narrative is where you, I, are telling the story. The second person narrative, which is the least commonly used narrative, is you. Basically, you make the reader a character. Instead of using the pronoun I, you are repetitively making sure that the reader places themselves in the story and becomes an active character. This is a very difficult narrative to sustain because the grammar plays a very pivotal role, and it's very difficult to maintain the grammar because you're writing in present tense. So I don't recommend my students to use this, but it never harms. It's never wrong to experiment in class. The last and the final type of narrative is the third person narrative. This is by far the most frequently used type of narrative. This is where you aren't exactly in the story, you are the omniscient narrative who is telling about the other characters. This is where we use he, she, they, and them. So you're basically unraveling the story without personally being present in the unfolding of the story. You are free to choose any three, but I would suggest you should experiment less with the second person narrative and play it safe with the first and the third. There are other ways in which you can be creative. You don't have to experiment with the second person narrative. The other thing that you need to bear in mind, something that students are rarely ever told, is that in a story or in a narrative, you are creating the world. In a way, you're playing God, so you can do whatever it is that you want. A lot of the times, I'm being asked questions by students: can we do this in the story? Is this possible? Is it okay if we do this? Is it okay if our character feels like this? The answer to all of these questions is yes. You are in charge. You have been given a situation. This is a world that you are creating out of your own mind. You can do whatever you want. Your characters can do whatever you want. Of course, if you stay within the limitations and the expectations of the O-Levels English language. The other thing that I want you to know is you don't have to stick to the same old boring way of telling a story. There are so many ways in which you can tell a good story, a captivating one, an engaging one that will make the examiner want to read, not just give you an A. The first and the foremost that I want you to know about is called a dream sequence, or a flashback sequence that students most commonly know. This is where you are unraveling a story, but in the end, the examiner finds out it was just a dream, or it was just an old memory that was being recalled within a flashback. This is a very fun form of writing to experiment with. And especially if you're writing a dream sequence, you can make the unimaginable happen, things that people won't expect to happen in real life. The second type of story writing, is your train of thought. This is a very, very fun form of writing to experiment with. But then again, you can derail from the expectations, because when you're writing a train of thought, there is no formation, there is no proper way to think. You might have one thought followed by a completely disconnected second thought, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth, and so on. I encourage my students to experiment with this form of writing because it's so much fun, but at the same time, the examiner may not like the fragmented way you tell a story. So you can incorporate it within a normal story as a small part, but best to refrain from it. Then again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't experiment with it. The third form is a monologue. This is usually incorporated with the first person narrative. This is where you're basically recalling a story that happened. You can consider this a substandard way of storytelling, but in a monologue, your opinion and your personal point of view becomes extremely strong. Whereas in a first person narrative, what you're doing is you're incorporating other characters as well. But in a monologue, it's just you and it's just your voice. You can also incorporate dialogues if you want within a story. So there are a lot of ways in which you can experiment how you tell a captivating story. Just remember, you've been given a chance to create this immense and beautiful world within 350 to 500 words. What happens in it, where this world is, who are the people who exist in this world, what are their idiosyncrasies, what makes them unique, is all something that you are in charge of. Don't be afraid to play with it.